So it's been a few days and I've put some more work into this guitar. I have reinstalled the pickguard and the electronics. I cleaned out all the hardwares and see the bridge is much shinier now. I did end up getting a whammy bar. This is like $3 on Amazon, so I pulled the trigger on that. And I have strung up the guitar. Now, the rollers that I came up with are actually doing okay. I did reinstall the nut with some super glue and made sure it lined up, and as I was putting the neck back on the guitar, one of the things I noticed is that the neck was installed not straight on but at a bit of an angle. And so what ended up happening was that the high E string was a little bit, I'll see if I can show this, hold on. I did this with just the high and low E strings on at the time just so I could line it up, and it looked kind of like this, where it was pretty clear that the neck was a little bit tilted to the right. So what I ended up doing with just the low and high E strings on, because I figured that might be an issue, is I put the strings on to line it up, and I just kind of I loosened the 4 screws by maybe a full turn each, and pulled slightly on the neck as I was retightening the screws to line it up properly. And I had to do this maybe 2 or 3 times. The first time I did it, I kind of overcorrected, and then had to find out how much I actually had to pull on the neck while tightening the screws. But I got it lined up pretty well, where it looks pretty parallel down the whole fretboard. So it is much better now. But that's just something to note. Another thing I had to do actually was I had to install a few shims. I think I used 3 pieces of like cardstock or paper because, and I thought I saw this when I first got the guitar, but I wasn't sure until I actually strung it up and looked at the action. I'm gonna stand the guitar up for a second. So the neck, when it was first on the guitar, had a bit of an angle to it in the wrong direction. So the neck was kind of pitched up like this, when it wasn't that extreme, but it was pitched up slightly, which made it so that the action was like this high off the fretboard, with the bridge settle totally flush to the bridge. So lowered all the way, it was still that high. And the neck was flat at the time, and it was just a really bad install job. So what I ended up doing was shimming the neck, and that leveled it out much better than it was originally. So yeah, that's something to, I mean, I really saw it here. I don't know if I showed it in the previous video, but you could see like this part of the neck here, where the maple's showing, was thinner, and this part was just a little bit thicker. So I could tell there was like a little bit of an angle, but it was bad enough that it actually needed to be shimmed several times. But that has been resolved since. The action is a little over a millimeter. It's probably like 1.25 millimeters on each string, maybe a little higher on the low E and the A strings. But overall, pretty playable action. What I noticed, however, on the parts of the fretboard that had like the indented fret markers, like this one here at the 9th, and I think it's this one at the 12th, yeah. I actually thought that was going to get in the way of the playability of the guitar, but what I found out after playing it for a little bit, and it's not fully set up or anything, I'm just kind of figuring things out on it still. What I realized is that as I'm fretting and going back and forth, because the string is really just riding on either side of the fret, it doesn't really, unless I like really press down hard, which I tend not to do apparently, it doesn't really cause a problem with these indented fret markers. There's no scraping on the actual wood, so it actually hasn't caused any problems with playability. It just kind of stays on either side of the fret and doesn't really affect it. So it's actually pretty smooth going back and forth. So I'm gonna leave those. That's not gonna be a big deal in terms of playability. And even this gouge, as ugly as it is, doesn't change how it plays. So that's kind of nice, actually. As for the string rollers, they seem to be doing a decent job. I mean, again, it's very rough, but it works. I haven't had any tuning issues with it, really, even with these bad tuners. But, I mean, part of the reason I got the whammy bar was to see how far I could knock it out of tune when it's using a vibrato. and to see if those string rollers make any difference. And they seem to be doing a pretty decent job so far. You know, they're good enough for free. That said, what I've been doing lately, and again, I'm not finished really setting up the guitar, I've been trying to go back and fix some of the really bad fretwork on this neck. There were a ton of frets that were too high or misshapen, and the actual barbs at the end were very sharp. So I've gone back and cleaned up the ends of it, and now I'm just kind of leveling everything. And once all the frets are leveled, I'll do a proper setup, and we'll see how it plays and what the intonation's like. I did plug it in and play around, and the pickups sound pretty poor. You know, they work, they function, but they're not great sounding. So that would be a major upgrade that I'd like to do, is put some good, you know, real quality pickups in it. So that might be, you know, phase 2 of this whole restoration process. But for phase 1, for just getting it playing again, it works, it functions. This 5-way switch I found out, although initially it felt pretty good, if you know, just go back and forth, it's fine. What I found out is if you knock it to the side just the tiniest bit, it comes very loose. And you have to press it back into place for it to go back into the clicky state. So it's a very cheap switch. That is something I'd like to upgrade at some point, because I don't really trust the quality of that to hold up. And one more thing I would like to show you, which is going to be the tremolo cavity. There is a major design flaw, which we are going to have to tackle at some point. Alright, so here's the trem cavity, and one thing that you might notice is that this tremolo claw is not parallel to the cavity that's routed out for it. It's like very close here and pretty far away here, so it's got like a sort of a triangle shape going on here. Originally I did have this parallel, because usually when you have this set up properly and designed properly, the tremolo claw should be parallel to this cavity cutout, and then the springs would run to the bridge. What I found out, though, and again, I only realized this after I was using the whammy bar for a bit and feeling that it was responding very strange, is that this cavity is, I'm going to turn my phone this way actually, is not routed out properly. And that's probably not a huge surprise. It is a cheap guitar after all. But if you look carefully, where the 5th and 1st springs would go, if you were to take a line and trace it all the way, it would not at all line up with these. In fact, let me grab a straight edge and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Alright, so just to demonstrate my point, here is the edge of the route. Okay. So if you look here, so I'm lining my straight edge up with this edge here, and if you look, the spring hole versus where the claw is, I mean, there is, if I move this up a little bit and try to keep it as parallel as I can, you see how they're not lined up at all? So what I found out was that the way that this was installed, this claw really should have been pushed further that way when they drilled the holes for it. And in order to do that, this would have had to be routed out more. And so in order to fix this properly, what I'm going to have to do is take away some material from this wall here to allow me to push this claw further to the, in this case, to the right, so that there would be a straight line from here to here and a straight line from here to here. In the meantime, what I have going on is really just essentially tilting the claw so that at least at this point there is a decent, how do I even phrase this? At least at this point there is a close enough difference in the spring tension on either side, because originally when I had this parallel, it was pulling way harder on this spring and not as hard on this spring, because essentially what was happening is that the spring was being stretched a further distance on this side than this side, even when this was parallel. And that created a really weird dynamic when using the vibrato, because you could actually feel it. And to a certain extent, you could even see it if you were pressing on the whammy bar. You'd see that part of the bridge was dipping lower than the other part because there wasn't an even amount of spring tension. So having it, quote unquote crooked right now, crooked with the route, but straight with the springs and the tremolo, is our sort of for now option. I think eventually what I'll do is I'll actually take my Dremel out with a sanding drum and just take away, I don't know, maybe a millimeter or two off of this edge here. And then I'll take the claw off completely, add some wooden dowels and wood glue to fill in the holes, realign this claw, drill the new holes, and then that should line up a lot better. I guess another way you can tell is if you look at here's another way. So you see this hole here? That hole is the screw for the part of the tremolo that is directly under the high E string. And you have 1, 2, 3, right? 4, 5, 6. Now the sixth one for the low E string is under this spring. So you can see that it's just not lined up at all. It's very off-center. So right now I really just have it so that there is an even-ish, I can't really measure that right now. I guess I could take, for instance, this straight edge and measure the length of the spring. And it's that much versus that much. I'm trying to make sure that's more or less even. It's close enough for now. When I actually fix it, it'll be better. But that is something that I only noticed because I was using the whammy bar, and it wasn't immediately apparent when I first looked at it, and now that I see it, I can't unsee it. So that is something to note. So we will have to fix that as well. Again, this is one of those things where somebody probably used a template but didn't line it up properly, or the template is just wrong and nobody caught it. Yeah, it's pretty bad. And actually, one other way that I was able to ascertain this, when this spring was straight, when I had this spring going straight to the very last one here, it wasn't quite rubbing against this, but it was it was like that close. Whereas this one, there was plenty of clearance. If you were to draw a line, you have basically that much clearance here. So almost like a finger width. So that was another telling factor right there. But yeah, that's what we're going to have to do to fix that, is actually remove some material off that right-hand side of the route here, and then fill in and re-drill the holes for the tremolo claw. So that'll be a nice little experience to have. But yeah, that is something else I noticed.